Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to another YouTube video. My name is Chris Burns and I'm the artist of Chikara and Gun-game. Today, we're going to be going over toning tips for comics and manga. Let's get started, everyone. Alright everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel and to another YouTube video. I'm pretty excited for this one, not gonna lie, because toning has been something that gradually over the years I've gotten more and more appreciative of, but also I've enjoyed it more and more when making my own stories and my own illustrations. Before, I didn't really tone a lot in my art because early on, as you all know, I drew a lot of my inspiration from Masashi Kishimoto, the creator of Naruto, and with Kishimoto's art style, specifically for Naruto, there is not a lot of toning going on. It's very black and white, and I say that not as just like saying, it literally is a lot of just black and white. He doesn't do a lot of tones and gradients for things, or at least not until later on maybe in the series, and that could just be something I might have missed while reading the manga and just watching the evolution of Naruto grow. But from early on, I can definitely say it was very, I guess, that classic manga look, which, you know, was black and white. And like I said, today we're going to be talking about toning origins, toning tips, ways that you can incorporate toning into your manga comic illustrations to make it look a little bit more subtle. And then there's some ways that we're going to talk about you can really go all out with your tones depending on the vibe of your story and of course your art style. So, toning or screen tones, what is that? So here is the official definition from Wikipedia about what a screen tone is. Screen tone is a technique for applying texture and shades to drawings used as an alternative to hatching. Now, if you don't know what hatching is also called cross-hatching. It's where you take lines that are going in opposite directions to create almost like a gradient effect or texture. And that's still used today in a lot of different styles of art, but most of the time you can get a pen now that does it for you. You don't have to do it organically unless that's just your style. It also goes on and talk about what a dry transfer screen tone is, and basically those are like the classic back in the day ways they were doing this, because, you know, pre-digital era for manga and comics, everything was done by hand, right? So these tones and these sheets were basically put onto whatever panel they're working on or illustration, whether it's clothing, skin tones, and they would be manually cut out using an X-Acto knife. And then of course, once all of the art is done and the toning is done, traditionally they'd scan it in, and that's how you get the pages done. We don't have to do that anymore, thankfully, unless you are just a classic traditional artist that is still using those type of screen tones, because they are still available. You still can use them. Like, it all boils down to preference and what you like doing. But for me personally, digital is definitely the way to go, because screen toning can, number one, be expensive if you're buying it traditionally, but also if you do not have a steady hand with an X-Acto knife, or you just, to put it in layman's terms, you don't know what you're doing, it can be a lot of money for a lot of mistakes, and personally I just don't have time for that right now. So toning or screen tones definitely have been used for a long time, and it has not just been used by the Japanese. Screen toning was used a lot for classic comics or Marvel and DC. So basically they were used in both sides. It's not just, it was not originated by just one person. It kind of ended up just being a very a staple thing to do in the comic book industry, whether you were from the West or you were from the East. It was just depending on how you were using them, that's where the style and it comes into play, right? Because in the Western media for comics, if you look at like some classics like Superman, you can see that the toning is it's very simple. They're not using a lot of toning for gradients. They're not using tones for skin tones. It's very simple stuff, almost like just kind of adding a little bit of texture to the artwork, right? Not really using toning as a form of art itself, more of just adding to the initial art that's been done. But in the East, obviously with manga, you could see that toning, and even now, toning is, you could take toning and actually make it into its own art form if you really wanted to dissect it, because it's not just adding a little bit for the art. Sometimes toning, if you take all the toning out of an image, the art honestly looks really naked, and it looks very bland. But when you add the toning in, it adds so much more, like with gradients, with shadows, with texture for clothes, with skin tones. It really is an art form on its own, and that's how I see it. Because before I even started doing like toning for my own stuff, I was very intimidated by it, because number one, I didn't know how to really get the effects that I wanted digitally, because I was just ignorant to it, right? But as I got more involved in it, studied more of how other manga could use it for mangas like Attack on Titan is a prime example of how toning can make things look so dark and so realistic. But not just with Attack on Titan. You can look at things like My Hero Academia. Kohei uses toning in a completely different way, adds it subtly, but he also adds it for a ton of clothes and backgrounds, because My Hero Academia has so much different fashion and culture references in it. You need toning to kind of add these different subtle things to the art to differentiate between either a character's skin tone, a character's race, their style of clothing, where they're from. So toning can definitely play a part and help you kind of push what you're trying to put on your paper and your story and your characters. So I briefly talked about it, but there are different tones for different parts of the art, and that doesn't mean that one tone can be used for this and one tone has to be used for that. You can mix and match and use whatever tone for whatever you want. This is all up to you and what you're trying to create. But there are some ways that you can tone certain things, like clothes, that are going to be different from toning things like skin tone, hair, or backgrounds. For example, for a background, for tones, you might want to use something really basic as just a basic gradient for like a sky, and then for the buildings, maybe a basic gradient of just really small millimeter dots that kind of add just subtle shadows. And maybe for the trees, you want to do something that's just fully blacked out. Maybe you want to do some cross hatching for the trees. It really all depends on your art style. But for clothes, it's going to be really different. It's not going to be a crazy amount of detail, because the goal is to draw the clothes yourself with the folds and the lines, and the gradient's just supposed to help. You can add a gradient to clothes. You can add basic shadows to clothes. Me personally, as you can see on the screen with Gonzalez for her scarf, I don't do anything crazy with her scarf. It's literally just shadows, but just in tone form, because her scarf is a light red. So I don't want to go overboard with the scarf, because I also still had to do her skirt, her jacket, her hat, her skin, her hair. I had a lot to do, right? So I don't want to overdo everything, and then when you're looking at it, you're like, oh man, I don't really know what to look. I want some things to pop out, and I want some things to be really subtle, and I want some things to just honestly be black. That's just my personal preference on how I use toning. My best advice when it comes to toning is definitely, like I say for everything else, is to just study whatever type of manga or comic genre that you're trying to replicate, and really pick from that, because toning is something that can be taken and used the same exact way, the exact same way. So don't feel like you have to like, oh man, Kohei Horikoshi used toning for Deku's shirt like this, so I can't do it like that. It's a toning method. It's not copyrighted. Someone does not own the way to tone. It's a style, right? Just like everything else. So if you take inspiration from how Kohei does his toning and incorporate it the same way into your story or your characters, you'll get that look that you're trying to replicate, without a doubt. So let's talk about toning for skin, or skin tones. So this is a big personal preference, because I personally, when I'm doing my people of color characters, I don't want their skin tone to actually be made up of dots. I want it to be almost like a flat marker color, because me personally, when I'm toning everything else, the backgrounds, the clothes, the hair, I don't want the skin to kind of get what blended into all of that, right? I want the skin to actually still pop. And that's my personal preference. So all of this information, right? Because screen toning, like I said, is a form of art in and of itself, but at the end of the day, there isn't a lot of secrets to it, right? There's a lot of basic tones that everyone knows of, and then there's tones that people do create digitally, for their own type of story, because you can technically make a tone out of anything. You can make a tone out of any picture, you can make a tone out of any image and turn it into a texture. You can, if you know the ways to do it, whether it's Photoshop, Clip Studio, whatever, or whatever you are trying to work in your app wise. If you could figure out how to make that tone, you could turn anything into a tone. But it all boils down to personal preference, just like everything that I talk about pretty much, because I have my opinions on line art, on how to color, whether it's Copics or digital, or toning, screen toning. I have my preferences, right? Because it works for my art style and in my art process, right? Because I'm working on 2 stories now, so I have to be considerate of how do I want this story to look rather than this one, right? Because the toning in Chikara is completely different from the toning in Gun-game. Completely different. Because Chikara is a more long-running series, and I'm working not to save time, but also I'm not trying to make it look super realistic. It's a very fantasy driven story, very whimsical, but with Gun-game, I'm trying to make that semi-realism feel. It's really dark, it's really grungy. So yeah, it's gonna be more heavily toned, it's gonna be heavily realistic. Things are not gonna look the same because those are two different types of genres and feelings I'm trying to give. So at the end of the day, it's all personal preference. I definitely say to try, fail, and try again in terms of toning to really get that look you're going for. If you want your stuff to look like Naruto, study Naruto, do little to minimal toning, and you'll get that look. If you want to do something like Vagabond, or do something like Berserk, or do something like My Hero Academia, go study that manga and try to replicate that look. And it's that simple, guys. And that's all I have today about Screentones. It's very, very quick. It's very, very brief. It's not a lot of information because, you know, screen toning really isn't that hard once you figure out how to do it. It's very fun, actually. So I hope this video kind of gave you some insight onto the history behind Screentones, but also a little bit more comfort on letting you guys know that you can do this. This is not something that should be intimidating for you like it was for me. Get in there, learn how to do it, and have fun with it. More videos are to come, guys. I can definitely say that a big video is on the way with another YouTuber, TikToker, artist. He does so much. I'm really excited about it because we're doing a video together, but also he's starting his own podcast, and I'm going to be on his podcast. It's going to be really, really fun, really exciting. You guys will know all the information for that when it happens. As always, stay tuned and up to date on my Instagram. If you want to know what's going on in my world, whether it's for YouTube, TikTok, Gun-game, Chikara, Instagram is the way to go. So make sure you go to my Instagram, make sure you hit that follow button. We are progressing. We are coasting right now in a very good spot, mentally, physically, emotionally. I'm chilling because I know once Chikara gets back and rebranding, once Gun-game gets out there, content is gonna be flooding you guys. I'm gonna open up the floodgates and you guys are just gonna be eating all that up. It's gonna be a good dinner. And as always, guys, I hope you have a good, awesome week, month, year. It's a brand new year. Let's crush it, you guys. It's gonna be dope. Peace.